So today, I would like to go with you to the book of Matthew, the 5th chapter, Matthew chapter 5. I have it all laid out on my little iPad thingy. It's not an iPad, just a cheap old Galaxy thing. But it still works. Anyway, I get it all set to go, and I can never use it. I always go back to the book here. It's hard to break habits, but it's a good habit. So chapter 5 of Matthew, and I like to read verse number 6. It says, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." All right, just a verse that's pretty familiar to people. And if you're like me, when I hear a verse that I know, I go, okay, I already know this one, so what's he going to say? I don't know if that runs through your mind or not. But hopefully we'll get into something that will be helpful to you. But it's talking about, thirst. That's why I went to the water. It's an object lesson this morning. Blessed is he, or blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. All right, I'm glad for hunger, honestly. Gives me an excuse to eat. It makes eating enjoyable. How many ever eat and you're not hungry? Mm-hmm. Like, why am I doing this? Sometimes, anyway, won't go into all that. But hunger is the driving force, isn't it? It's something that motivates us, that moves us to do things to satisfy that feeling. And of course, thirst is the same thing. When we get thirsty, we want to take care of that push, if you could use that word, to drink something. And the Lord here, of course, is not referring to those physical things, but he's using them as he does to illustrate something spiritual. If he was to try to tell us this, that we understand through this object lesson of thirst and hunger, it might be difficult. How would you say this if he didn't use those two examples? You might say, you got to have spiritual drive. And you go, huh? What's that? That's the way that we are as human beings. We don't understand the concepts of spiritual things. And so when the Lord teaches, he teaches using things that we do understand to say, this is like this. So he says, you know how you get up in the morning and you want some bacon and eggs and stuff? That's because you're hungry. Or maybe you do, maybe you don't. But he said, blessed are you when you are hungry, but not for the physical food, but for the spiritual food. Because when you're hungry, you're going to put forth the required effort to get that desire satisfied. And so we understand things through the words that he tells us, gives us, because he illustrates the spiritual truth with something from the natural world. If you want to go with me to then we'll stay in the book of Matthew here a little bit. Chapter 13. Chapter 13 of Matthew is a chapter that is full of parables. It probably has more parables in this chapter than any other chapter in the Bible. And so not only is it full of parables, but he gets into what the purpose of the parable is. And if you've been around for any length of time at all, you know that this is a subject that I bring up from time to time. And so this is one of those times. And so it says, like in verse 3, it says, and he spake many things unto them in parables. So if he wants you to understand something, or if he wants these people to understand something, he's going to tell them parables. Now, parable, the word para means to lay side by side, or the word parable means to lay side by side. And so this is the chosen and even prophetic means of Jesus' teaching. He taught in parables, which means that what he said is an illustration of a truth. And that is a vehicle, if I could say it that way, to take you from what you know to what you don't know. And so he says, I have a spiritual attribute that I want you to understand, and I'm going to show you how it works by telling you something that you do understand. And anyway, we'll go ahead and read a little bit here. I forgot I started verse 3. And he spake many things unto them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. Some fell upon stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up, because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and thorns sprang up, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. But other fell into good ground and brought forth fruit, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, and some 30-fold. And then he makes the statement, who hath ears to hear, let him hear. So he tells this story, and how interesting the story is, I don't know really. The sower went out to sow, and he sowed, and it fell here, and it went there, and it went everywhere, different places. And the point that he is making is not to tell you the story about a real sower in a real field with real seed, or natural, but it was to show you how the sower of the Word of God goes forth and scatters the seed. And we talked about that a little bit while we were just visiting here. And he scatters the seed, and the seed falls on different places. Now, this is a parable that has an element of fear in it, because he tells us that there's 4 types of ground. And the 4 types of ground really represent our hearts. How are we going to receive the Word of God? And it said, some fall by the wayside. The wayside is the road. The way is the road. And so if you go throw some seed out on D and half road out there, what's going to happen to that seed? It's going to die. Jesus said the birds are going to come and eat it. I always feel justified when I throw food out the window, because I say somebody's going to eat that, so it's not a bad thing. Now, if I throw paper, that's not good. But if I throw, something I'm done with or whatever, so the birds come and eat that seed. So what happens to the seed? It doesn't produce anything. In fact, it doesn't do anything. It just becomes food for the birds. And then the other one, there's some fall by the stony ground, and they grow. And that might be just offside of the road. That's why I see it in my mind, out there in the gravel, the base of the road that they use, and it's stony ground, and so there's not much earth, and consequently the seed sprouts because it gets enough water to do that, some sunshine, and the next thing you know, it's growing a little bit. And the Lord said that it withers and it dies, because it didn't have any depth of earth. I'm not really trying to preach or teach this parable. I'm just going over it because it's not the parable this morning that I'm looking at so much as the structure of the parable and the purpose of the parable, how it works. And so another kind of ground was among the thorns. So you go out there and you throw seed out there in the thorns, and it says it grows up, but after a while the thorns overcome it, or they choke it. Have you seen those kinds of weeds that just wrap themselves around another weed and they take the life of it? And the Bible tells us that in the beginning the ground was cursed because of the sin of Adam and Eve. And so that ground produces this stuff that is not food, it's nothing but trouble. And if you plant tomatoes outside of a pot, and even sometimes in the pot, you get these other things growing up that are not hard to grow. I have a great weed garden. I have had great weed. I don't have it now. We have an HOA. But anyway, the garden is hard to grow because the ground is cursed. The weeds grow easily. Okay, I'm overdoing this. So let's go on. He said, that's like when the cares of life begin to choke the word out. So we've got to have some depth of earth, and we can't let thorns and thistles choke the word. And so these are illustrations that he's using to get people, mainly just to look at themselves a little bit. And I think the question is, out of this parable to me, is what ground am I? And then the last one says, it falls on good ground, and it springs up and it brings forth fruit, some 30, some 60, and some 100, if I got the numbers right. Some 60, some 30, and 100, 100, 60, and 30 fold. So the great thing about seed is that, and this is a part of the law of the harvest, is that it reproduces much more than it is. If you sow seed, the seed is going to reproduce more than it is. Jesus said that when he talked about the grain of wheat that falls into the ground. He said if it doesn't fall into the ground and die, he's speaking of himself, about himself, fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it dies, it's going to bring forth what? Much fruit. Okay, so these are just some things that we learn. See, I was just trying to go through that real quick. But there's a lot of lessons in here that could take a lot of, the whole hour or whatever to go over and to teach. And just this little short story that Jesus gives, because we see the illustration and then we understand the spiritual truth through that illustration. Now, again, it's not that I wanted to teach that in itself, but I want to look at how this thing works. And so we continue to read verse 10. It says, and the disciples came and said unto him, why speakest thou unto them in parables? Why don't you just tell us? Don't tell these stories, but tell us. No, well, Jesus is going to answer for himself. I started to answer, but I'll just read what he says. He answered and said unto them, verse 11, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. That's an interesting statement. He said, I'm teaching in parables because you're going to get it, but some people won't. Wow. Remember what I read at first. He that hungers and thirsts after righteousness shall be filled. And so really these parables are indicative of how hungry and how thirsty we are. If we want to know what God is saying, some parables are hard. There's some parables that I'm not even sure what are they saying. But we know one thing, what they're saying represents a spiritual truth. And do you want to know that truth or do you not want to know it? And Jesus said to some, it's going to be given, speaking to his disciples, unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom. Mysteries are, I enjoy mysteries. I guess I'm naturally curious, not just about spiritual things, but mysteries in general. I like to try to figure out what's going on here. And Jesus taught that way. He said, here's a story. I want you to figure it out. What is it I'm trying to say to you? And so he says, it's going to be known to some and not known to others. I want to be the some and not the others. I want to get what he's saying, and I don't want to be the ones that are not shown mysteries. Does anybody want to see the mysteries of God? Do you know there are a lot of mysteries in the kingdom? And he speaks of them right here. So he says, it's given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not. I like prophecy. I don't always get it right, but I like to study it. I like to try to figure it out. Then I'm going to read some more. 12. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance, but whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. And so he's saying, and this doesn't seem fair to me, okay? I'm like, you give this one, and he has this, and now you're saying you're going to give him more, and the other not? Well, that, just out of fairness, we may not like that so much, but what he's saying is a little deeper than that. He's saying, if you understand the mystery that I'm trying to show you now, then once you get that, I'm going to show you other mysteries. And so this thing that I'm saying here is that a revelation becomes the basis of the next revelation. So he builds upon one another. If I get understanding of a certain area, then I'm going to be open for understanding of the next level that God, and there are a lot of levels to the kingdom of God. And so we want to be seekers. And I say that we do, I believe that we do. Verse 13 says, therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And who's he talking about? He's talking about those that are not hungry, those that are not thirsty, to put their heart into what he's saying. And he continues, and in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and not perceive. I'm just deciding whether to read. Okay, let's do it. For this people's heart is waxed gross, or grown hard, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed. I don't want to close my eyes to truth. The thing is, though, truth can get you into trouble. Because once you know truth, you can't unknow it. And then you have to live by what you see. And sometimes that's not a comfortable place to be. And so he's saying these people, some will not hear, and they will not see with their spiritual eyes. Lest at any time, in the middle of 15, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should understand with their hearts, and should be converted, and I should heal them. I want conversion in my life. If something needs to be converted, I want that. If something needs to be healed in my life, I want it to be healed. And not only that, but I want the same for the people of God. I want conversions. I want to see conversions. We want to see healings. And so Jesus is saying, that, well, I'll just read on what he says. I always try to say more than he's just going to tell us. Verse 16, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For verily I say unto you that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which you see and have not seen them, and to hear those things which you hear and have not heard them. And then he goes into another a parable. But so we look a little bit at the structure and the purpose of the parable. Actually, it does two things. It conceals truth and it reveals truth, both at the same time. This is the wisdom of God. He can tell a story that will divide people. And he says, you're on this side, you're on this side. Some people are not going to understand, but the same story is going to make other people understand. And so this is the working of the parable, is to show us things if we are hungry and if we are thirsty for righteousness. Thinking here, got to move on. I'm at one of those places where I want to dig into something, but the book of Matthew, I believe chapter 5 where we were, he said that you're verse 13, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden down under foot of men. And then he said, you are the light of the world. The world, a city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. And so you may have heard this combination of words, salt and light. Salt and light is supposed to be salt and light. And salt brings out the flavor of things. Salt, it makes food taste better. And so its ability is to help us to be more, to eat more readily, to enjoy the food. And it says, you're the salt of the earth. People who are salt make other people, I'll say, curious. And that's really what I'm preaching this morning, is curiosity. Do you want to know, or are you satisfied the way this is? I always want to know a little more. I say I always do. The Lord knows whether I always do or not, but I like to think that. And we ought to be all desirous to know more truth. I think of the preacher in the 18th chapter of the book of Acts by the name of Apollos. This preacher was really a good preacher. He expounded the scriptures really well. He was eloquent, the Bible says. Are you being attacked?
Yeah.
I know.
It's coming at my eye.
I don't know where in the world they're all coming from, but this man Apollos was eloquent. He was knowledgeable of the scriptures, and he was very persuasive in his preaching. And Priscilla and Aquila heard him preach, and after he was done, it says they came and expounded the word to this great man more perfectly. Profoundly. And in other words, Apollos, you're really doing great here, but do you want to know something else? We have something else to share with you. And so they set him down and they expounded the word. It doesn't say that Priscilla and Aquila were great preachers, did it? It just said they taught him. And then afterward, when he got this step into the understanding better, he became even more effective. And so God has things for each and every one of us to grow into. But whether we grow into it or not depends on whether we're thirsty and whether we're hungry. Again, we are hungry for knowing God's purpose, His will, and because we are, I want to say we get into trouble. Trouble being, we're not always going to be in agreement with everybody. Now, there's a lot of, I mean, it'd be real nice if everybody agreed about everything. We don't, though. But I'm accountable to what I do see. And you're accountable to what you do see. And I can't ignore some things, and you can't ignore some things if you're going to progress. We were eating last night, and couple and their family came in, sat down at their table, and anyway, got their appetizers, and I wasn't able to see, but Diane was, and she said they're praying for their food. You know, do you ever notice that? People that pray for their food? That's commendable. I like people to pray for their food. And so ours had not come. They got their appetizer before we got our food, and so they prayed, and then we were praying afterward, and I think they probably saw that. We weren't praying so that they would, but got to thinking about them while I'm eating, and I felt like, well, make a contact here. But you know how that goes sometimes. Anybody ever just kind of, oh, okay, maybe we'll run into them again sometime. So if you're in Fruita, you know there's like a roundabout in the middle of town. So we're going around about that roundabout, and we got to talking about this couple, and I said, what if the Lord was telling us this, that go say something? And so in the roundabout, the good thing about roundabouts, you can go right back the way you were coming from, if you want to. And so it was a perfect chance to say, okay, let's just drive back there. And we're going to go, and so we went in and just visited real quickly with them. Gave them a card and said, we'd really like to give you, no, I didn't say it that way, we'd like to get with you and maybe do some studies or whatever. And so, Salt and Light, there was a hunger there because we could see something in their lives. Hopefully they could see something in ours. And there's that attraction. Salt and light. And so spiritual hunger is so, and thirst is so vital. But salt is what God has called us to be, which is an element that is really, if you eat salt, you get thirsty, right? So it enhances that desire, and if salt's going to make your food taste better. So it helps people to want to know. I remember coming into the church when I was in my 20s, and it was so much different than what I grew up in. I mean, it was different. I'm like, wow. The first time everybody started praying all at once, I was like, let me out of here. But you know, you get used to that, and you begin to realize, oh, this is kind of the way they did it in the Bible, that they lifted up their voices together. So it's okay. Got used to that. But I remember a brother, his name was Brother Addington. And in those days we met in a house we opened up 2 rooms. Together they weren't as big as this room. But before church, we had this time designated as prayer. And so we would come in and people would be praying. And I remember Brother Addington praying, and he prayed with such fervency. And he prayed with such passion. And I'm going, I want to pray like that. And he was really an encouragement to me because he was being salt to me. He's saying, you can pray like this if you want to. And to pray is an awesome thing. Jesus was asked by his disciples, teach us to pray. Sometimes the only thing that we need to do to learn how to pray is to see an example of it. And so this was a man that had given an example to me. So I was hungry, I was thirsty for that dimension of the Spirit, and I began to seek after it. Okay, now gone kind of a long way here in saying some things, but God has, maybe I can ask you this, do you think God has something new to show you at all? Okay. Well, I believe he does for me, and I believe he does for everyone, and I want to be hungry for that. I want to be thirsty for that. But if I am not hungry enough to put forth the effort, anybody ever are hungry and you just don't want to cook the food? So you go to McDonald's or something? Every now and then that happens, maybe too often. But we are sorry, I forgot my point again. That happens way too frequently. But to get to that place where we gain spiritually, it really does have to be preceded by hunger and thirst. And another word, and I mentioned it probably, for that is to be curious. What does God want to show me? Or how does God want to use me? And I want to know bad enough that I'm willing to do some things. I know one thing this morning, I can stand here and confidently tell you I don't know all there is to know. We already knew that. But I do want to know more. And will I know it all before this life is over? No, I won't. But I do want to get as much as I can. And I believe that you sit here as well today and want to gain those things. And so we have to have a curiosity about us. I don't have it all figured out today. I really don't, and you're not shocked by that. But I do want, and I want us to desire to know, and in order to know, we're going to need to have that curiosity. Anybody ever read a verse and you go, what is he saying there? And if you read very far in the Bible, you're going to read one of those verses. What is he saying there? Because spiritual things are not readily understood in our brains. And so when something like that hits me, and I hope when it hits you, you say, I want to know the answer to this. And there are things that maybe you want to know answers to that you've tried to figure out and never did it. Is that true with anybody? There's things that I don't get this. That is a setup. It's a good setup. Because when you want to know but you don't know, and when you want to know but you're not really getting the answer, then that gives God the opportunity to come and say, let me show you. And we call that just revelation. When he says, okay, I'm going to show you this. You've tried to figure it out for a while, but I'm going to show you what I've really got here. And so this thing, in fact, the two words are built on the same foundations of mystery and revelation. The word mystery means to cover up, and the word revelation means to uncover. Now, that's probably not new to you, but that uncovering is such an awesome thing. Another word for it that I've heard lately is not late. I mean, is the word epiphany. Anybody ever hear or use that word, epiphany? So I just had an epiphany. I was looking a little bit this morning, and the word epiphany is basically translated sometimes, and it's got, again, the same words basis, but as theophany. How many know what a theophany is? A theophany is when God makes himself known to somebody. Like in the Old Testament, a lot it said, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto him, and then the angel of the Lord left, and then when the guy saw it, said, I've seen the Lord. Well, what did he see? He saw a theophany. Did he see the entirety of the Spirit of God? No, because it's everywhere. God's Spirit is everywhere. But he saw a visible form of God, and he calls that an epiphany, a theophany. In other words, it's an enlightenment. We saw something that really we weren't able to see. So, my desire today is to have those revelations that God wants me to have, and for you, that God wants you to have to come to pass in your life. I think to know Jesus is an epiphany. That we read about him, but to know who he is an epiphany. Peter had one, and I can change that to Revelation. Peter had one in chapter 16 of Matthew. And Jesus said, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? I've got a question for you. And if there's a question, then you will want to seek for the answer. And so they said what they knew. They said, some say you're John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And then the Lord said, okay, that's what everybody's saying about me, but who do you say that I am? And Peter, this is something I would have liked to have observed to see how long it took Peter to say what he said. But it doesn't tell us how long, but it does tell us that thou art the Christ, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God. Thou art the Christ, the Son of God. And the Lord said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah." What did Jesus say earlier? "Blessed are the eyes that see the things that you see." And he said, "Flesh and blood hath not revealed." I think there has to be a time where flesh and blood has to work at it. I think we have to put some effort of our own thinking into this. But when we think and we work at it, and it doesn't come to pass, that we get to understanding that we now need God to step in and say, boom, this is what it is. And we call that revelation. He said, "Flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven." It came to you spiritually. This is the purpose of the parable. And as we read on down, I'm going to wrap it up here. Jesus said this is so important. Well, let's go there. Chapter 16 of Matthew. One more page. Jesus, verse 17, "And Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood have not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also," I'm going to say something else, "unto you, unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Upon this rock. Now, there's certain groups that say that the church is built on Peter because of what that was just said. That's not what Jesus is saying. Peter is not the foundation of the church. The foundation of the church is Jesus. But there was something going on here beyond that. It said that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. This rock caused Peter's name to become Peter. Did you know that? He said, "Thou art Peter." His name that was given to him was Simon. And we know him sometimes as Simon Peter. But his name was Simon. And the word Simon comes from the word Simeon, which comes from the word Shem from the Old Testament, which is the root word of Deuteronomy 6:4. It says, Hear, O Israel." The word "hear" in Hebrew is Shema. It's where Peter got his name Simon. It came directly from Simon. And it's so appropriate that here Jesus is asking his disciples, and the one whose name is to hear is the one that gave the answer. Didn't he also say, "Blessed are the eyes that see and the ears that hear"? I'm telling you, Jesus said some ears will hear and some ears won't hear. Blessed are the ears that hear. There has to be a revelation that comes to us. And here Jesus said, "I'm going to build my church upon this. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." And so Peter, because you heard, I'm going to tell you something. Your name now isn't Simon, it's Peter, and that means rock. If you want to be a rock, you got to be a hearer. If you want to be a rock in the kingdom, you've got to be a hearer. You've got to shema. You've got to listen so that Jesus can show you and give you revelation of things. I believe today that, and I'm going to quit. I believe today that the church, just as Jesus said, is built on revelation. It is not built on tradition. It's not built on denomination. It's built on revelation. and regardless of what title we go by as a group of people, it's the revelation that we get that builds the kingdom. And we become responsible for the things that God shows us. And sometimes that means you make choices that separate you from other people. Okay. I said I'd quit. So, we are, again, responsible for what we see, and we can only teach and preach the things that we understand. So, we're just saying today and encouraging all of us, each of you, to not be satisfied with where you are, but say, okay, Lord, I need to know the next step. And I believe He will show you as you come to Him and say, Lord, give me ears to hear. It's a great thing to hear. What was it last week? We were doing a little Bible study, and Monty and Diane started to say something, and Monty said something about the same time, but lo and behold, it was the same exact thing, what he saw and what she saw. And it was a little bit out of the way, a little bit unusual. Do you remember what it was? Something about the serpent and anyway, God can, I've seen it happen before. God gives the same thing to two people at once. I like that because it confirms. Yep.
I started speaking at the same time.
You actually did. But you had said, I didn't write it down, and I don't remember what it was. The point being that God shows the church things, and He builds the church on those things that He shows. So we're going to close it out here this morning with the admonition or the encouragement to see things. Ask God, show me what it is. So if you'd like to stand with me today, and we will lift up the Lord, and I hope that you will pray for understanding